And guess what? I spent £2,000 in the first month, and I got 0 clients. I had 1 inquiry. People in banking are extremely smart, intelligent. Yes, they're driven. Yes, they're extremely ambitious, but they're not some evil kind of people that you see Wolf of Wall Street trying to hoodwink people and take their money and try to buy yachts and stuff like that. I'm an entrepreneur today and I love doing what I do, but I would never barter or trade my 3 years working at Goldman's with anything else in my life, because that was an eye-opening moment for me. And he was like, Samir, you're a religious person. What are you doing in an investment bank? I'm like, what do you mean? That's when I realized that, hang on a minute, financial modeling valuations is so technical. It really stirs my blood. I hated TikTok. And the story of TikTok, today I'm on TikTok. I have 25,000 followers within a few months of starting TikTok. And I hate myself on TikTok. But that's what the business.
Boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to my podcast, Coffees on Me, David Quan, where I strive to give guests legacy-worthy interviews that listeners can enjoy while cooking, commuting, relaxing, or walking their pets. This is a special episode because I'm in a hotel room in Cambridge, but my guest and I are still enjoying a latte. We are almost at 3,000 podcast downloads, and if you have been enjoying the discussions on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts, please do consider leaving a review and nominating a guest by contacting me through my Linktree, David Quan. I cannot thank the guests enough for their courage and insights. I'm very excited to introduce my guest today, Samir Merchant, who just came from London for a special workshop event that we held at the Cambridge Student Investment Fund, CAMSIF. We are very grateful that he has chosen to come to Cambridge to share his knowledge. So Samir Merchant is the founder and CEO of City Investment Training, and he has almost a decade's experience in investment banking, working for companies such as Goldman Sachs and Barclays. He has covered stocks across a broad range of sectors, including chemicals, fintech, and real estate, with market cap ranging from 50 million to more than $100 billion, I would assume. Samir is also the CEO and lead equity research analyst of Alpha Stone Equities. He has a charter from the CFA Institute USA and has a master's in finance from the London Business School, LBS. Samir grew up mostly in India and Canada, moved to the UK about a dozen years ago. He is a proud father of 3 and has been married for 15 years. Samir, a very impressive introduction to say the least. Congratulations on all your achievements, but most importantly, welcome to my podcast, Coffees on Me, David Quan.
It's a pleasure. Wow, that's a lot that you squeezed in for a 2-minute introduction, David. Almost feels like I'm so old, but I'd like to think I'm quite young.
So why are you at Cambridge?
Cambridge University. So thanks to the Cambridge Investment Fund, Student Investment Fund, I got, obviously you introduced me to the fund and what you were looking to do in terms of helping students who want to get into investment banking as a career. So I thought it would be, with my 5 years of experience helping students to get into banking, I thought it would be a great win-win situation for students from Cambridge University to learn more about how to crack investment banking interviews, how to build financial models, how to value businesses, so that they can add them, all of these skills, to the CVs, which is an important toolkit to have to get into any banking jobs. And I think for me, it was always important to come out, spread the word, not just about City Investment Training, but also what it takes to become a banker, what it takes to become an analyst at a top investment bank like Goldman Sachs. So having spent the entire day with the Cambridge students, I think it was quite fulfilling. The level of questioning I got was, some of them were daunting and challenging, which is good, and some of them were really basic questions. It goes to show that it's the entire spectrum, where some students are way ahead of the curve. They've taken the effort to teach themselves about banking, and then there are others who have just recently come across banking and have developed this passion and love. So I know banking always stirs my blood, and it's always been my passion to help students to get into banking, because there's so many myths around banking, as you very well know, having worked at GSAM yourself, that it is great to be able to debunk some of the myths, and help. And in fact, there's so many students who come back and say, "Oh, I wish I had known about this 2 years before, because that's when I graduated." So it's so fulfilling when students come out and say, "Yeah, it's because of my 2-day workshop with you, or because of my interaction with you, that I've been able to settle on a career that I really like."
Well, thank you very much for sharing, and there's no doubt that due to your own personal experience working in the industry and spending the last 5 years at least running city investment training, and I think you, at least on your LinkedIn, the slogan is that you provide training programs that help students land a job in investment banking.
Yeah.
I know that you have a lot of insights and practical advice that listeners can enjoy, but if that's okay, I'd love to have a more in-depth discussion about applications in the industries a bit later on in the podcast. And before then, I'd love to find out a bit more about why you are who you are, why you choose to, focus on the things that you focus on. And I feel like it's quite interesting, actually, being an international student myself, having moved around China, Australia, and UK.
Sure.
Do you want to share maybe an overview of your upbringing in India?
Sure. Great. So I actually grew up in a very posh area, I would say, Mumbai. I was very lucky and privileged. If you ever come across Bollywood movies, then Shah Rukh Khan and Amir Khan, and all the Khans live in the area that I lived in. And I grew up in. So very privileged. Went to a Christian denominated school, English speaking, St. Andrews, really well known in the area that I grew up in. So very privileged upbringing with my education, I would say. When I was in my 5th grade, I also happened to have gone to Canada. And again, it just so happens that I ended up living in Richmond Hill, which is again supposed to be the uptown area of Toronto. Went to school there for a few months, ended up going back to India to finish my studies, did my undergrads, and then ended up getting my first job as a consultant and then as a trader. I was always passionate about valuations, how businesses are valued. I know I never had formal training at university when I did my MBA. When I did valuations, I think the teacher was surprised as to my level of technical knowledge, because I was pretty much an autodidact. So I had to teach myself valuations. And that was my level of passion about valuing businesses and trying to figure out about stock markets, and not just about the emotional side of stock markets and what really drives share prices up or down, but being able to quantify it. Just going back to, so that's where I really started off. Got my first real equity research job with so this person set up in India a company that would help companies across the world, the banks, with financial modeling and valuations. And he had spent 2 years as an analyst working for Merrill Lynch in New York. He had worked, and he was one of the smartest people I've ever met. Abhilash Jaikumar. He was actually now also the co-founder of Crème Financial Services. And he then spent some time at Alta Private Equity. Again, so for somebody to have 2 or 3 years of experience and then work at private equity, where he was already sitting on the boards of companies that they invested in, just goes to show how intelligent the person was. And I was very lucky, because the company I joined, which he co-founded, I was one of his first recruits, the first 20 or 30 recruits. So he actually trained me himself in financial modeling and valuations. And spending that month with somebody who was so intelligent, and he was so sharp, and had a real passion for what he did, that's when I realized that, hang on a minute, financial modeling valuations is so technical, it really stirs my blood. And I can't believe that this guy is doing it for free.
Tell me more about him and what made him different, because I would imagine in this industry there are lots of very great analysts, lots of great leaders and people, and
very good question.
What made, what separated him from the other great investors?
I think to be successful in the corporate world, you need to have really good people skills. And he was one of those workhorses who used to work crazy hours even after he started his own business. Because when I started my own business, my work hours came down quite a lot.
When you say crazy work hour,
I would say he still worked 18 hours a day.
Wow.
At his own business. And he would be the first one in, the last one out of the office every day for at least the first year that I was at work.
Is that healthy?
I would now say it wasn't very healthy, but he was one of those leaders where he set the tone. and he said, I worked at Merrill Lynch, I worked at private equity, but this is my passion. I believe in that kind of work ethic. And he wanted to lead from the front, as an example. Now, when you're young and you're right out of university and you look at a person like this who's actually been there, done that, okay, it's his business. But it's quite, it is quite transformation for you as well, because depending on where you come from, I never had that kind of a work culture where you were focused 18 hours of job, doing a job 18 hours a day. I come from a very religious background, so for me religion was really important. So I had to whatever job I took, I was always very adamant that I would do my prayers.
Which religion, sorry?
Islamic religion, so I'm a Muslim. So it's really important to pray, right? So I'm a Shia Muslim, so we club on our prayers. Typically you think it's 5 times, but we club our prayers, so it's only 3 times. So I would make it a point, even after working 18 hours a day, and this is the beauty, right? You could work for somebody who asks you to work 18 hours a day, but he respects you to say, oh, if it's your time of prayers, you got a lunch break, you can go for it. Yeah, it's totally fine. So I think that was something that for me was really important, that if you can take care of my faith and not interfere and just give me my privacy for the 10-15 minutes that I pray, I'm happy to come back and put in the effort that's needed to make sure that your company is successful, but more importantly that you see me being part of the team who's working towards the same end goal, which is to make sure that the clients are happy.
So for someone like him, as you said, to lead from the front and to be the first to come, last to leave, which is very much a sporting kind of
yes, it is
a thing, and the fact that you still reflect upon his influence, would I be right to assume that at that point he possessed either quality-wise or skill-wise that's something you deeply wanted?
Yes.
And what was that thing?
So as I said, I was really privileged to have been almost trained by him one-to-one on financial modeling and valuation. So just imagine somebody who's spent 5 years in private equity at one of the best investment banks in the world to actually sit down and train you one-to-one on financial modeling. So he'd actually take the mouse away and say, somebody build me a financial model just with Excel keyboards, shortcuts. Wow. And so he was, and the beauty is that you would sit in his financial modeling class, an accounting class, and there would not be 1 second where you find it boring. You come in every day, you're excited that you are getting to learn financial modeling. Another great thing about him was he was very smart, he was really sharp. So I remember interviewing with him, and I had done all the self-study about what private equity is and how people make money in private equity. And I'd read all the Harvard Business School notes on private equity. So I went into the interview, and he said, Sami, what do you do? So I say, I'm a trader, I trade Eurodollars, which is not the currency, but the interest rate to Eurodollars. And he's like, okay, so he said, okay, so he found out what I do. And then he said, okay, how do private equity companies make money? Because big client base was private equity. So I say, you know what, they take debt, so they make money through deleveraging. And then, they improve the operations to make sure the EBITDA is higher so that they can sell it at a higher multiple eventually. And I ended up missing one point. And he said, that's great, but you're still missing something. So I'm like, I think I've covered all the bases, because I'd read the Harvard notes on private equity, and that's all they said it was. But this guy is somebody who practiced private equity. So he's like, Samir, what do you do? So I said, I trade. So how do you make money? So I said, buy low, sell high. And then he said, that's the piece that you're missing, because private equity companies might not add any value to operations, might not be successful at deleveraging, but they might be very successful at just buying companies which are undervalued and selling them, which after the right valuations come about in 5 years' time. So those are the 3 legs of how private equity companies make money: higher EBITDA at the end, higher multiple, and deleveraging. And so he took my example and my experience to explain how private equity companies make money. And it's exactly at that time when I realized I would love to work for this guy, because he is sharp, and he was one of the sharpest tools in the toolbox for me. Yeah, so the reason I came to London, to be honest, when I looked at him, it's like, this guy works as a banker, he's from Merrill Lynch, New York. Everybody in the world who works in banking is as smart as he is. So that's what my understanding was, a stereotype. When I got to London, I worked at Goldman's, some really sharp, smart people, but I never found a second Abhilash Jaikumar. For me, he was always streets ahead of the rest of the people who worked in banking. There was just something about him. And then there are many things I've actually adopted in my own training programs, like the importance of attention to detail. And he would try to drive the point home. He would say, Samir, 99% correct is 100% wrong in banking. You can get away with 99% at university at 90%. You'll be the first guy. But in the real world of banking, if you make one mistake in maths or trying to compare or trying to calculate and compute valuations, that's 100% wrong. So there were many things I picked up from him. His good communication skills, he was very sharp. And he was also very good off the ball, which means he was very good off the work, because he would introduce us to, and he would always challenge me. So I was very religious. He knew that. He would always challenge me. Why do you believe in this? Why do you this? And I was most of the time very good at answering that. But he introduced me to a different way of thinking in life, which nobody else in my life actually gave me. And one of the beauty about him is I've left that job now for almost 15 years since I last saw him face to face, I would say. But whenever I go back to Mumbai, I would always call him up and say, hey, Abhi, do you have 2 minutes or half an hour to catch up? And unfortunately, for the last 2 times I've been to India, he's actually moved to the US. He's moved back to the US, and he does a lot of sales and marketing for his company there, because they sell globally. So it's been very unfortunate I haven't been able to meet him.
So this is the guy who works in private equity, which many consider to be the holy grail of finance.
Correct. Crème.
And clearly loves this job. Why do you think he took the time to mentor you, to challenge you? Like, how did your relationship flourish during that time? Because he clearly seemed to have cared about your developments too.
Correct. No, I think that's a mark of a great leader. A mark of a great leader is he's not only worried about himself, he's worried about developing other people. A mark of a great leader is that he leads from the front. He just doesn't tell you to work 18 hours a day. He works 18, 19 hours a day to prove to you that it has to be done this way.
Is that right in private equity, that it is 18-hour days?
Private equity is not 18 hours a day. M&A and bulge bracket banks is 18 hours a day. It's metal on the pedal.
Lots of listeners would have heard private equity, but yes. I know that I don't want you to be 99% right, but can you give a brief context overview so that people listening can...
So private equity is a fund structure where they raise money. So let's say I have managed to raise $1 billion, and I've convinced people to give me $1 billion. What I do with the $1 billion is I look for 10 companies in the field that I am an expert in. So let's say I'm an expert in fintech. And I will go out there and I will meet about 1,000 companies before I make an investment in 10 companies. And I will say, okay, these are the companies I'll invest in because they check all the boxes. They have strong and stable free cash flows, which means if I want to pay my debt back, I can do it. I can service the debt. These are companies that are either first or second in the industry and the niche that they operate in. So there are certain characteristics of a company that makes it a good LBO candidate. I will buy 10 companies and I will add a lot of debt to it. So 70%, 80% of the cap structure will be debt, 20 to 30% will be equity. Sometimes 40% will be equity. The more debt you have, the more money you're going to make if the company is valued higher at the time of exit. So typically the investment horizon is 5 years. So you invest in these 10 companies, you help operate them. So now you own 100% of the business. So if you wanted to make and parachute in a new management, you would actually do that if you're not happy with the management that is already there. So you have total autonomy on how the business is run as a private equity fund. And so the idea is let's say you buy a company for $100 million and it's making 10 million of EBITDA. Sorry, I'm getting technical here. And you paid 10 times EBITDA to buy the company. So you paid 100 million. The idea is if you can run that business, double the profitability from 10 to 20. And also, so now the company is worth 200 million. But you're also able to extract a higher valuation multiple because you improve the operations and the growth of the EBIT is higher. Let's say you get 15x. You've just taken a business which is worth 100 million and after 5 years is worth 300 million because the multiple has gone up, the underlying EBIT has gone up. But the beauty about private equity is 70% of the 100 million came from debt. And when the value of the business goes up, the value of debt doesn't go up. In fact, it goes down because you're deleveraging. You're paying back some principal to the senior loans. So the return is magnified and compounded because the value of equity is going up in multiples while the value of debt is actually going down. Hopefully that gives you some understanding of what private equity companies do. And the reason I always tell my students I love private equity and I prefer private equity over M&A is because when you do M&A and mergers and acquisitions, you do one deal and you move to another deal. So you're never around to to check if the synergies that you promised the investors have actually come to fruition. In private equity, when you buy a company, so you need M&A deal-making skills to buy a company, but then you need the entrepreneurial skills to be able to run the business profitably, to make those difficult decisions when things are not going your way. And to be able to have an exit plan. Okay, so where do I sell? How do I sell my business in 5 years' time? Do I do an IPO? Do I sell it to another competitor in the industry? Or should I sell it to another private equity company? So you need to have all of that sorted out before you actually buy the company. So I think that's the most fascinating part about private equity versus traditional M&A, is where it's not just the deal-making skills and buying a business, it's also being the entrepreneurial skill sets of being able to run the business for 5 years profitably and improve the business, and then have that exit strategy where you sell the business for hopefully a handsome profit.
What misconceptions do students, in your experience, have about either M&A, investment banking, or private equity? Because it sounds great, you know, about the funds growing and the earnings and the returns and the carry that you get from these funds. But what are there 2 or 3 things that students disregard or don't, or would benefit from knowing before they make that decision of wanting to enter that industry?
Yeah, I think the first thing is there's a lot of myths created about bankers. Buy the newspapers, buy the movies like Wolf of Wall Street, and then it becomes a stereotype. And a lot of people say, I'd rather work in technology than banking, because all the people in bank are all evil people, right? And so when I worked in equity research, you know, most of my seniors, family guys, had 2 or 3 kids. There was one person I used to work with who made it a point on Tuesday evenings he would go home at 5. So even though everybody would stick around till 7, he'd say 1 day a week I want to spend with a proper evening with my family. So he was very adamant about that. Everybody respected that. Most people would leave at 7, so still have, you know, unlike M&A, it's a bit more civilized. So the first thing I would say is that people in banking are extremely smart, intelligent. Yes, they're driven. Yes, they're extremely ambitious, but they're not some evil kind of people that you see in Wolf of Wall Street trying to hoodwink people and take their money and try to buy yachts and stuff like that. So that, I think, is the biggest myth. The second myth, or one of the things that attracted me to the business, is how smart. Again, coming back, it's not about the moral decadence. It's about how smart the people really are. And when you put yourself in a career surrounded by extremely smart and intelligent people who have ways of doing things that will help you grow as a human being and as a person, and sometimes even morally. So one of the biggest takeaways for me working at Goldman Sachs was when I came from India, I had a lot of cultural baggage and a lot of cultural illiteracy. And I had a way of thinking, and I was very religious, and I had a very narrow-minded, parochial way of looking at life. And when I came to Goldman Sachs, within a few months, I was like, I had to take a step back and say, Samir, everything you learned about a different culture from the outside had to be challenged, because when I looked at these people, morally, the way they interacted with other people, they were so much better than I was. So immediately I had to rewire myself, because when you sometimes become very religious, you become this, sanctimonious prick where you think you're better than everybody else. And immediately that got challenged. So I think one of the biggest takeaways, I'm an entrepreneur today and I love doing what I do, but I would never barter or trade my 3 years working at Goldman's with anything else in my life, because that was an eye-opening moment for me.
So faith and banking are often seen by people on opposite ends of a spectrum.
Yes.
And clearly you don't agree with that. So how have you personally been able to balance your faith and moral ethics with an industry that has a lot of uncertainty around it?
Correct, yeah. So I had a friend at Barclays. It's very interesting that you bring that up. So he was a colleague. I trained him into financial modeling. He was an Oxford University graduate. He was new to Barclays, had no ideas about what financial modeling valuations are. We got talking, we became good friends, and obviously I always learned from other people, so I always gave them I always made him feel empowered enough to give me his opinions. And one day while we were going to breakfast, he turned around and said, Samir, you keep talking about religion all the time, not all the time hopefully, quite a bit, and I can't square the circle. I'm like, what do you mean? And he was like, Samir, you're a religious person. What are you doing in an investment bank? I'm like, what do you mean? So it's because his concept was, if you're a religious person, you should be a hermit somewhere, sitting somewhere in the mountain. and just, worshipping God over there, right? And not be worried about being greedy and working in an investment bank. And that's not what most religions tell you, whether that's Christianity or Judaism or Islam. Working hard is worshipping God, but having to work hard in a legal way, of course, in where you're not hoodwinking people and you're not cheating people. You're working hard, you're trying to add value to your clients, you are trying to add value to the company and the people you work with, and you're trying to improve yourself and you're trying to improve others around you. That is worshipping God. And I think a lot of people have this misconception that worshipping God means you go to the mosque, you go to the church, and that's where God is worshipped. And once you step out of the church, that's where religion ceases to exist. It's quite to the contrary, actually. The harder you work, the better you would get at your religion. That's my key takeaway from those misconceptions that come with religion.
Has your faith impacted any of your career decisions, or has there been any moments of conflict or challenge where you've leaned on your faith, for example?
Yeah, so many times. So I always, again, it's a very personal story. I've never spoken about this probably spoken about this to a few students of mine, but for the people who really know me, I would probably talk about this story. So there was once a time where I was actually in between jobs, and it was a very critical moment for me because I'd applied for a work visa to come to the UK. And when you apply for a work visa, you get a 3-year work visa, then you get another 2-year work visa, dependent on the fact that you need to have certain salary in the last 18 months. And if you didn't have enough salary in the UK, they would not extend that work visa for you. And it just so happened to be that I was in between jobs at that point in time. So I was called by a headhunter who said, Samir, we have this great opportunity for you to become a capital goods equity research analyst at BNP Paribas. I was all excited about it. I was already interviewing with another company. I went in there, and the deputy head of research spoke to me, and immediately he liked me. He took a liking to me, and within 15 minutes he said, Samir, are you interviewing with somebody else? And I was like, yeah, I'm at the latter stages at this other bulge bracket bank. So he's like, Samir, I really like you, and I want to be honest, I think there's somebody who's resigned today, but it's not the capital goods role, it's the beverages role. And I'm like, beverages, I'm Muslim, I don't really drink alcohol, so there's no way I could justify doing the job, because if you really cover a company, whether that's autos or chemicals or fintech, you really need to be passionate about the product to be able to give it 100%. So I didn't know what beverages really meant. I know that there were a lot of soft drink companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi in the US, but this was European kind of beverage company, so I had no idea. So I said, yeah, okay, I'll come in. So he said, I have to get you to meet my head of beverages tomorrow itself, because I don't want to be left out. I don't know you're interviewing with somebody else. So I went in next day, and it's a really Irish guy who sat across the table. And he said, pitch me a stock, and I was very grateful, because I'd learned how to pitch a stock at Goldman's. It's known as the Goldman Sachs approach to pitch a stock. Seven steps, 3 minutes, and they teach you that every Tuesday at Goldman Sachs. So I did that. He was really impressed. Then he turned around, he asked me this really quirky enterprise value question, and I answered that because I had, with experience, I knew that there were companies out there which could have zero enterprise value even after their shares are trading in the market. So he was really happy. He stepped out. The deputy head of research came back in, said, Samir, what do you think? So I was like, Nick, I came in for the interview because I really wanted that capital goods role. And I asked the gentleman, what kind of companies are there in the beverages sector? And he said, 100% of the companies are all alcohol companies. So I was in a fix. I was really like, yeah, it was a really difficult moment, because that's when your values are tested. And what happened at that point in time was, I told Nick, if I try to make, you try to be funny, right? Once you work in corporate world, you want to say no, but you want to say no in a nice way. So I was like, Nick, you know what? I come from the East. If my parents find out, my family members find out I'm actually covering alcohol companies, then they'll make me stand in front of a wall and they'll all shoot me. And they'll be proud to shoot me. So Nick didn't even crack a smile. And that's when I thought that, I've really lost him, because he's a deputy head of research. And they don't like they don't like juniors to tell them no even before they're hired, that is. So on the way back, I was really gutted, because I really wanted that job. It was back then, it was my first £100,000 plus job. It was a big brand, because that company was third ranked in equity research in Europe, which is even higher than Goldman Sachs, by the way. And so I got a call from a headhunter saying, Samir, how did the interview go? I was like, James, lovely interview, loved the guys, but I went in there for the cap goods role and I really want the cap goods role. He was like, no, Samir, they really need this person. If somebody is resigned and they really need this person. So I was like, okay, you know what? Just what was the feedback from them? Oh, the feedback is great. You've got the job. What are your thoughts? I'm like, James, I really do appreciate it because for him, if I get a £150,000 job, he takes home 75k in the next 12 months. So he really wanted to sell the deal to me. But I was like, you know what? I can't do it. Beverages, 100% of the company's alcohol. And I know that if I don't have a job in the next 6 months, I probably have to pack up with my family and go back to India. But that's a decision I'm going to stick with. And then when I kept that phone down, I was in the overground train and I looked up in the sky and I was like, God, I didn't have a job. And the only job I get offered is an alcohol company covering the alcohol sector for the biggest salary that I could have dreamt of, right? I had a small tear in my eye, but I was like, okay, you know what? At the end of the day, if you're somebody with faith, whatever faith you have, you know that the job you have, the life you have, the privileges you've got, all comes from God. So if He decides that this is the job if He wants to give me a better job, He can give it to me overnight. So that's the time when you really ask yourself, do you really have faith? Do you really think God is all powerful? Or do you think He's some kind of a person who's not at all powerful and He's sitting on the side and He doesn't really care about you?
And did you doubt?
There was no doubt. So the moment I kept the phone down, the only thing I looked up at the sky and I had a tear in my eyes was because I had passed the test. I knew it was a test. It's a test because this world is a test. Nobody said this is the heaven. God, in none of the books, the Bible, the Quran, or the Torah, does God say this is a heaven and I've created you for the heaven. He has created you for the heaven, but you got to earn your heaven, right? As they say, one of my Punjabi friends from India, he actually said a lovely line. He said, Samir, the way to heaven is through hell. You will be tested, right? If you want to find diamonds, you got to jump into the coal mines. You cannot get gold unless you heat it at certain temperature. So you have to go through really tough times to mold yourself into something better that you see yourself being. So there's no way you could be a great person sitting and drinking Kool-Aid on the beach. But at that time, the only regret was I didn't have a job. It was such a tough test. But I was proud that I came through that test because I realized at that time how much it meant to be somebody with faith. Because this is an opportunity if you are as passionate about banking as I am, and for somebody to give you a job and to give you an offer and the salary was the biggest salary I've ever had in my life. And I basically at that time I realized how much I really care about my faith. So it was a great opportunity. I mean, what happened after that was the second company I was interviewing with, it didn't work out. And it was just a funny story. So they called me, said, we had two candidates in the running. They really liked you, but they've decided to go with the other one. So I was like, okay, no problem. Whatever God decides, I'll go through it. Within a week, they give me another call saying we did offer the other person the job, but he decided not to take it. And so they were very embarrassed because they needed somebody immediately as well to come and join them. And they were like, we would like to increase your salary by 30%, and
Wow.
we really want to do this. Would you mind coming on board? So I was like, yeah. I wouldn't mind coming and working. So it was a big brand anyway. So it was a huge brand, one of the top bulge bracket banks in Canary Wharf. So it ended up working out. But in that moment, that 2 weeks that where I had to say no, I never regretted it. But I just went pounding the payment again, trying to look for something which was more related to my skill sets. But yeah, it was a great learning experience for me.
When you turned down that beverages job offer, it wasn't just the massive salary at stake. You talk about that you might have to pack your bag with your family and go back.
Correct.
So the first time you saw your family after turning it down, what was their reaction and how did you tell them and what were you feeling?
So the good thing, one of the best things you can get in life if you're a person with faith is to have a partner who has faith. And I've been very lucky with my partner. She has more faith than I do, to be honest. Like the way she lives her life. Every time I've met with a dejection in life, she's always been there. And the first thing she would say is, remember, this is what God has decided for you. And the smartest person in the world is God, because He's created the universe. He knows what He's doing. So for you to say, why did you do this to me? By the way, in any religious faith, if you look at the religious injunctions, the moment you say, God, why did you do this to me, is you're stepping over the territory of becoming an unbeliever. Because the literal meaning of an unbeliever is somebody who's ungrateful. So he's not saying that he's an unbeliever because he doesn't believe in God. An unbeliever is somebody who's not grateful to God. So she would always remind me that, she would always keep me grounded, saying, Samir, remember that this is something that God has decided for you, and he knows you're good enough to go through the test. So when she realized that I'd just turned down the offer, she was more happy than I was, because obviously she didn't have to go through the interview process and do the hard work and know what that brand name means in the industry, because she's never worked in the industry. What she knows is religion, because that's what she's practiced all her life. So she was like, there's no point in giving up your faith for a few bucks or for a brand or for an investment bank. So you rather keep your faith, you keep your head high, and you'll get something better. And that's what exactly happened.
Your first day at Goldman Sachs, which has people have lots of opinions about Goldman Sachs, but
Correct.
Tell me about your first day there.
First day at Goldman Sachs. So the interview itself was quite interesting, because my dad, who's not very religious, and we were growing up in a Hindu country in India, and he always thought that keeping a Muslim name is going to backfire when it comes to worldly things. So he always named us very tactfully. He gave us names. All the kids had names where you could actually not recognize that it's a Muslim name. That's the way he thought. And so when I got my first interview, the person who interviewed me at Goldman's, I stepped out of the elevator on the 5th floor. Back then, Goldman's was at Fleet Street. I know they've moved now. And the boss who interviewed me was actually looking behind me, looking for somebody named Samir Merchant. Because when he heard merchant, he thought it was an English name. So he was looking for somebody who was rather English, I think, okay? And then I actually walked up to him and said, I said what his name was, and he said yes. And so he had this, so why are you talking to me? I'm like, my name is Samir Merchant. Oh, you're Mr. Merchant. Oh, right. Okay, come with me. So basically, it was a great introduction to Goldman Sachs, to be honest. But no, the first day was awesome, because you walk in there, you've got 250 people behind the glass doing equity research, 300 people behind the glass. Goldman Sachs, one of the biggest names. And almost immediately, my boss, working with him, he was quirky in his own way. He was not the people's guy, which is very different from other people. But there was a lot of learning, a lot of, again, going back to work ethic and learning key moral values from other people and the culture. I think that was all fascinating for me. It was something, because even though I grew up and I really admired the M&A banker from the US, I was still working in a completely different cultural environment than working at Goldman Sachs.
You later on moved on from Goldman and worked at Atlantic Equities, Barclays, Peel Hunt, Alpha Stone, etc. These are all very big brand names with great comfort in terms of salary, in terms of career progression.
Correct.
When was the moment that you decided that you wanted to start your own business, and what was the motivation?
Wow, this is going to make me look bad. So I wanted to start an investment banking training company when Abhilash Jaykumar trained me back in India.
Wow.
And I looked at that, and I went through that program, and I was like, I couldn't believe that this was done for free. It's like, how can you be training me? Because I went through the entire education cycle, the undergrad, the master's program, and I couldn't find anybody who was so smart, one, but also what he was teaching me was so practical, like how to value a business. I was like, how can this be free? So I was always coming up with ideas about how to start an investment banking training company. So I decided to come to the UK with the idea that I'll get a couple of years experience in the UK investment banking world. I'll probably get a master's from Cambridge or London Business School, and then I would tick all the boxes and I'll start my own investment banking training company. But this is what happens is, once you get into investment banking, you're so used to and comfortable getting a monthly paycheck at the end of the month that it's almost like a slave. That's the chain they've got you with. It's a Faustian bargain. You sign up.
The golden handcuff.
With exactly the golden handcuff, right? And you sign up to deal with the devil, saying, okay, I'm comfortable working in banking. But then, 10 years had passed. I was working in the bank. I was like, you don't need a bigger pedigree than you've already worked at Goldman's, you worked at Barclays, you've got a master's in finance from London Business School. There's nothing more you can do to start your own investment banking training company. And the last, I should probably not say this, but there's something that happened in the last job that I worked at that made me realize that working for others is never going to be as satisfying as working for yourself. So I decided, I have my own safety net to come back. I have enough experience. I've got some of the biggest brand names on my CV. If I don't do it now, then I would probably never become an entrepreneur. And I always wanted to become an entrepreneur, as I said, from day one after university. And never, there was always the goods and, the positives and the negatives of working for somebody else. But for me, it was always about working for myself.
On a pragmatic level, I guess when you run your own business, you've got so many different dimensions to balance, like marketing, the legal side, just things that you perhaps don't really think about in a corporate world when the teams are so, different teams and divisions kind of collaborate and you focus on your particular niche.
Correct.
How do you find doing almost everything?
Yes. That's one of the biggest realizations. I was at King's College making a presentation a couple of weeks ago, and one of the students said, I really want to work into banking because when I look at you, Samir, I look at a banker and I look at a person who's successful as an entrepreneur. So I think any banker would be successful. If you're a banker and you're successful at it, you'll be successful at anything. And I stopped her and I said, that's not true. Because the skills that you need in banking is very niche. Analytical skills, math skills, to be able to value stocks and everything else is great. To be able to write research reports in a convincing manner is great, but it doesn't teach you how to market. It's not a B2C company. So when I started, the first couple of months I had 0 clients. 2 months I had 0 clients, 0 revenues, right? And almost immediately I realized that I'd done something wrong. So I thought I had this great idea that I'll start my business. I've got all the big brand names on my CV. London Business School. Who wouldn't want to train with an ex-Goldman Sachs analyst who studied at London Business School, Masters in Finance? Because that's the crème de la crème of education and investment banking world. And then you realize very quickly you have no track record as a businessman, right? So nobody wants to pay $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 to train with you. And so almost immediately it hits home, the point hits home that you got to have a track record in business. So the first biggest mistake I made was I had this idea that it's going to be so easy. I'm going to put my name out on Google and search engine marketing. Anybody looking for investment banking training, my name will pop up, City Investment Training. They'll come to my website and they look at my brilliant CV and my brilliant career and they're going to sign up. And guess what? I spent £2,000 in the first month, and I got 0 clients. I had 1 inquiry from a really funny talking person who couldn't even communicate English properly.
So it's almost like you were humbled by that experience.
And that was the biggest thing, that you have these stereotypes before you walk into business and you'll be successful and you're the sultan of your own palace, right? And it's never going to happen and almost immediately I was speaking to people. The one good thing I did was I had a co-working space. So I was surrounded by people who wanted to become business people, entrepreneurs. And there was this one guy who, again, coming back to stereotypes, he didn't go to the best university. I don't want to name the university. So I always didn't rate him, right? But he was an entrepreneur and he was still studying at university, but he was an entrepreneur for 4 years. And he said, Samir, Facebook is the way to go for you. Just imagine all your clients are sitting on Facebook. And in my back of my head is, I don't want to use Facebook and Instagram. I don't want to use TikTok because that's, for me, I don't want my kids to ever use that. So I don't want to use that. It's not a force for good for me. Okay, a lot of people have this negative connotations about all of these social media platforms. So for 1 month, I kept trying. In 2 months, I spent money on Google and I got 0. And then eventually I said, you know what, in business, you've got to be flexible. Let's put some money behind Facebook and see what happens. So all I did was I said, I'm not going to make that same decision of spending $2,000 before getting any clients. So I'm going to put in, I realized I could put $200, $100, $50. I could even put $20 to see what the reaction is on Facebook. So I taught myself how to do Facebook advertising. And that's when I realized that, okay, I've hit a little bit of, that's where I was getting momentum and I was getting traction and I was getting people and inquiries coming in. Now, almost immediately I was like, okay, Facebook is the way to go. And then what happens in business?
Also TikTok, eh?
Exactly. And then what happened was the first 2 years, then momentum started building up in business. First year is always a loss, so I always knew that. I'd already budgeted for that. And then what happened was Facebook really took off. I had a great year in 2019, so 2 years after my business started. And then all of a sudden the iOS update came in. Facebook was not as efficient and we had to reinvent ourselves. So we had to pivot away from Facebook. And so we started moving on to LinkedIn. And the platform I really hated because I know that every time you go onto that platform, the first thing they do is they stick a half-naked girl picture on your face. So I hated TikTok. And the story of TikTok, today I'm on TikTok, I have 25,000 followers. within a few months of starting TikTok, and I hate myself on TikTok, but that's what the business demands. But what I realize is people who use TikTok are not all people who are like just there to waste their times. There are also a lot of people who actually use that platform for politics. They use the platform because small snapshot videos of what's happening in the economy, what's happening in business. So it's much more than just people wasting their time. I signed up my first University of Cambridge student, somebody who had seen me on TikTok and signed up for the course. So TikTok was definitely, so it's in business. The first thing I realized is don't be parochial, don't be narrow-minded, be open to all ideas, and just keep, it's very simple. You test a little bit, you put in the money, you come up with good creative ideas, you test your ideas. If it works, and if you've got traction, then you spend your time there. Otherwise, you move on to the next project, and you keep testing, and you keep testing, and you keep testing, and you learn every day when it comes to digital marketing.
So you started and you were paying these ads and weren't getting the results you wanted because you thought that your CV was brilliant, your experiences were brilliant.
Yes.
And it would have been quite demoralizing, almost like, I guess, your whole worldview may have just changed, that
Correct.
you weren't
Absolutely.
who you think you were.
Absolutely.
At what point do you think, if that had continued, the poor results had continued, that you would give up on this entrepreneurship idea and go back to the comfort and stability of your corporate job with a big brand name that is highly respected?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest entrepreneurs said, I really respect this entrepreneur. He said, the moment you have a plan B, you've already failed, because your plan A should be the only plan, and you should be working hard to make sure your plan A is successful. And I don't agree with that, because I think you need to have a safety net. You need to have a plan B. You need to have a plan C, because and what it does, it gives you that additional impetus to keep going on your plan A. So what I mean is, if the investment banking training business had failed, I was always thinking that I will do some other business in equity research, because I had set aside 1 year of my life. I said, Samira, once again, a really smart saying was, when you hit 50 years of age and when you look back at life, the regrets you have are not the regrets that you did something. The regrets you're going to have is something you didn't take the opportunity to do. Okay? So this is really, for me, this is really important. That really drove home the point. When I turn 50 and 60, when I look back at my life, the biggest regrets I will have is not because I did something, but because I was not courageous enough to take that step and become an entrepreneur. And I've always wanted to become an entrepreneur. So for me, when I told myself that, I had already budgeted a year or two. I said, whatever happens, I'm going to start an asset-light business where I'm not going to take debt. I'm not going to, endanger the future of my kids and my family. It's going to be a very asset-light business. I have all the skill sets to become a trainer. I've been around the block. I know exactly what students need to get into banking. And you know what? With a 90% placement rate for the 8-week students who come in class and do the course, there's proof in the pudding that the course has been successful in helping students find jobs in banking. It works. And with students now working at Goldman's, at Morgan Stanley, at UBS, pretty much all the big brand names, it just goes to show that that you need to have the faith, but you also need to keep reinventing yourself and be open to new ideas. But yeah, just to answer your question, having a plan B, knowing that, okay, if it doesn't work out, I'm going to do this, kind of helps you out and gives you it relaxes you a little bit more than not having a plan B and being nervous all the time and anxious as to what's going to happen if this doesn't work out. Right?
What was another unanticipated challenge of running your own business as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge outside of marketing has been hiring the right kind of employees, because in the kind of business I am, your
reputation
matters. Reputation matters. And the problem is, I thought that I could take somebody from university who's half decent, train them up to become a trainer, and then I could take a step back and just think about the big picture in my business, because that's what big entrepreneurs do. They work on the business, not in the business. Right? So if I wanted to work on the business, then I had to come out of training eventually. Even if I had to train 20% of the time, I would be happy to do that, because I really want to help, give my students the best possible training. And what I realized very quickly is that the business is not profitable enough to justify, because what happens is I hire somebody from university, I I train them up for 6 months. They're ready to become a trainer, and guess what happens? HSBC comes knocking on the door, Goldman Sachs comes knocking on the door, hedge funds come knocking on the door, and they're like, oh, you've got 6 months of experience, you know how to do a financial model, you know how to do valuations, awesome, we'll hire you for 70,000 plus bonus.
Does that mean your business will struggle to scale then?
Correct. And that's why I always never wanted to start an investment banking training business. I always wanted to start an equity research platform, a much bigger £200 million to $1 billion business. But I knew it was going to take time for that company to become profitable. And I never wanted to take I never wanted to raise venture capital because I never wanted to be, it's almost like taking on debt. I didn't want to be responsible for other people's money. If I failed by my own sword. So for me, investment banking training would be a cash cow business, which would then fund the platform. And today I think we are at that stage. In the next year or so, we'll be at the stage where the business is generating enough cash flow to fund the other equity research platform. So yes, to answer your question, unless we increase our sales by 3 times, this business will not scale in the model that it operates in, which is the face-to-face, come in class, like an MBA model, and I'll help you become a banker. Where it will be successful is in the online model, where you could sign up as many people from across the globe who want to become bankers. So that's a different business model. It's a much longer conversation for another time, I would say.
Absolutely. That's very interesting. And I guess what you talked about with the reputation, like it reminds me of the quote that you win trust in drips, but you lose it in bucket loads.
Oh, lovely. Yes, absolutely.
And the moment that you deliver one bad workshop, it spreads like wildfire.
I've got a better quote actually. When I was a trader, my boss used to say, Sami, be careful of day trading, right? Because we, as day traders, we eat like a bird and we shit like an elephant, right? So it's pretty much what you're saying, where when to build up credibility is going to take you years, but if you want to lose it, it goes away in no time. So which is why if you're not focused on doing the right thing at the right time, always, and if you bring any bad reputation to yourself or the company, it can go down very quickly.
So what are you scared about?
All right, so in terms of scared, I'm not really worried about money or whatever it is. You always have a backup plan. The biggest worry for me is my faith, my kids. I would love to have them grow up with the same values. In fact, be even more passionate about becoming better people. And I think a lot of becoming better people come from self-development, comes from faith, comes from reading, comes from becoming an erudite, which means you've got to be able to read and be broad-minded, not be narrow-minded. So it's a challenge, it's a balance where you're trying to follow certain guidelines that religion gives you, but at the same time you want to be broad-minded. So I think my biggest fear is, to be honest, is in this, as I said, for me the motto in life is that this world is there, it's being created so that you are tested, so that you know who you are, because somebody up there already knows who you are. So for me the biggest worry is to not fail in the test, and not to give up, because we work in our businesses, we work 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours on our businesses, we are passionate about businesses. But for me, like in the job market, like in the investment banking world, never to give up the big values that the faith promotes and propagates for the small materialistic gains we will have in the short term. I think that's my biggest fear.
I'd love to ask some rapid fire questions to wrap up the interview, but before then, I would love to, if you don't mind, to read a quote that came up in my favourite movie, Coach Carter, a basketball movie, and maybe your son would really enjoy it. But I think about this quote because you were talking about scaling your business and growing and the potential that it has. So in Coach Carter, one of the quotes that was, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. Right. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We're all meant to shine as children do. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. Awesome. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others."
Fantastic.
I hope this is a message that you can reflect on after the podcast as you grow your business, because I I think any kind of education and with a mission to serve and to contribute and to guide other people is a noble one, and I wish you all the best on that. But some rapid fire questions.
Thank you very much. Yeah, by the way, I really like that quote, and I've heard of that before, but it's always good to remind yourself. But that is definitely one of the best quotes I've heard. Awesome.
Great.
Thank you for bringing that up.
You're welcome. So a few rapid fire questions. So for these, you need to snap judgment and very quick. Which firm do you think about when you hear investment bank?
Goldman Sachs.
What is the word that comes to mind when you hear private equity?
A goal in life for me to start my own private equity company. Yes.
What do you think is the main motivation that keeps people to work 18 hours a day in one of those corporate jobs? What's the single biggest reason?
I think the biggest failure, the power of failure. That I don't want to be a failure. I've chosen this field as a career, as investment banking for myself, and I can see other people working harder than I am. And sometimes it's about, some people do that just because they want to be, they want to time the clock. But really what you really want to do is the time that you spend should be quality time. So I think the biggest driver is fear for people who do it for the wrong reasons, I would say.
When people hear the words Samir Merchant, what are 2 or 3 words you would like people to think about?
The first one would be that this person is ethical. Now, I know I'm not. I have my own sins like everybody else. And that's the biggest pressure I have, sometimes living in a society which does not think about religion like the way I do. So I think the pressure is never to put my wrong foot forward, because I think it ends up brandishing a lot of the values that I stand up for. So definitely ethical, somebody who's smart, intelligent, and somebody who is generous and willing to help others. Again, moral qualities that I aspire for, not particularly the ones that I think a lot of people actually relate me with.
Final 2 questions, given that this is a legacy-worthy interview that I want you to look back on in years' time that captures a snapshot of who you are at the time. What is a message that you would tell your wife to keep in this recording?
Tell my wife to keep in the recording?
So to keep in this recording, what message would you want to tell your wife?
To my wife, I'll say, well done to you. We've been married for 15 years. So well done. Not to me, but to her. Because I know how difficult I am as a person to live with. Thank you for being with me I know her for more than 15 years now, and she's been the rock in the most difficult times of my life. She's always been there, and she always reiterates the importance of faith and of being strong in times of difficulties, because it's only in the most difficult and the darkest hours, right, that you realize who you really are. I think I thank her for doing that, and I thank her for being patient with me, because I know I'm not the most perfect person out there, even though I've never cheated on her, which is great. But I'm not a very easy person to deal with. So I do thank her, and I think one of the beautiful things about our relationship is that for a lot of her weaknesses, I complete her weaknesses, and for definitely a lot of my weaknesses, she definitely completes my weaknesses. So that's why I think it makes a good pair.
And final question is, and I want you to think about your 3 children as well. What is one quote, message, or saying that you wish every educator, leader, community organisers would promote and every child could internalise?
Yes. This quote is from the 6th Imam of the Shias, Imam Jafar Sadiq al-Islam, who says, "There is no wealth like knowledge, and there is no poverty worse than ignorance." And I think a lot of people, if they spend time in educating themselves, not only in the careers that they want to go into, or the religions that they follow, or learning about other people, and being open-minded. I think education is the number one criteria that people should be going after, rather than spending time watching TV and trying to fulfill their lower desires. I think it's very important that we as human beings spend a lot of time to improve ourselves and to educate ourselves.
Samir, thank you so much for taking the time, firstly, to come to Cambridge and do a free workshop for the Cambridge Student Investment Fund.
Sure.
I am very grateful, and on behalf of our society, I just want to thank you for coming along. But most importantly, I think thank you for your humility and perspective. I think there's a lot of wisdom with which you share that transforms the brand names on a CV. You know, you touch about faith, you touch about family and relationships, and the holistic dimension to life is very heartwarming for me as a student about to enter the working world to hear. And I guess it was fascinating to hear about the behind the scenes, the challenges of your businesses, and I commend you, I guess, on your courage with that beverages company, not taking that job offer, but also for taking that bold step to go outside of your comfort zone. And I again wish you well as you continue on your mission of helping more students.
That's great. I think that's one of the best concise summaries and most fascinating summary for what we've been talking about for the last 1
I
hour.
hope you enjoyed the podcast and don't regret doing it.
It was awesome. Yes. Thank you very much for having me, David. Appreciate it.
I'll see you tomorrow for another 6 hours.
Absolutely. Unfortunately.
Awesome.
Nice
Get some good sleep tonight.
And you. Cheers, mate.